Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and friends. Always good to be here and to talk at this event. Thanks very much also for the kind introduction. And I'll get right into it. And Andre also, excellent presentation. So nice to build on it. Because now I can either do it a one-slide answer to what we're supposed to talk about, or I can put it a little bit into context of where this all fits in. But you'll see it builds quite nicely onto what Andre and the traders, what they are doing in that space. Okay, so this is, and if we can see those slides coming in, I can see it here on my screen. There we go. That's small. But anyway, let's get the highlight out of this, or all of this. So in short, colleagues, South Africa has been amongst the fastest rates of agriculture yield improvements in the world. So if we just look at that screen, and what we're doing here, we are comparing it's maize, wheat, soybeans, and sunflower. And what we've done is done the bars on the left-hand side. It just gives you the absolute level of yields, okay? And those are average yields from 2018 to 2023. So if I just would give you let's look at soybeans. There you can see South Africa's, this bright orange color. And our average yield over the last 5 seasons, just over 2 tons per hectare, 2.07. Argentina, Brazil, and the US have higher yields in absolute terms. But that little diamond there gives you the growth rate, annual average growth rate over the last 10 years. In other words, taking from 2014 to 2023. So I realize, Andrew, this is like, when did SACTA start? Started at about, we had the collection of levies and soybeans 2019. So there is already this ramp up of yields before SACTA levies were initiated. And I'll get to that in a moment. We can talk about that. But in short, this is the good message is look at those growth rates. Colleagues, that's extremely fast. It's about 4% on average per annum growth rate compared to the main exporting, our competitors that Andre was just showing now, the shipping rates. Those are the big exporters. So we are literally a drop in the bucket compared to their volumes that they're exporting. But still, if we want to compete, if we want to be competitive, those are the ones that we need to look at. And at 4% average annual growth rate, we have actually caught up to their yields over the last 10 years, especially in the last 5 years. So they're lying at around about 1.5 to 2%. So if you talk to seed breeders, and there are more knowledgeable people in this audience, you normally target about 2%, isn't it? That was normally kind of the norm that breeders would look at 2% on average over the long run. In South Africa, we've done a lot more than that, and I'll get back to some of those reasons for that. Looking at wheat then, because wheat's also an important crop in this mix at SACTA, it's the average yields, and they are a little bit, we need to interpret them carefully. There, the yields are actually looking quite favorable compared to Argentina or Russia or Australia, some of those big exporting wheat countries. But there's a bit of an irrigation in there. So at a national average, we're not comparing apples with apples because they are mainly dryland. But still, if we look at the growth rate and yields, at the 10-year average, we are basically just above Russia and Argentina, not as fast as Australia in terms of the rate of improvements. But I've put a little star in there. Look at the last 5 years. So over the last 5 years, average yields in wheat have also increased rapidly. And what I did there, I took specifically the Western Cape dryland area. So we have seen rapid increases in yields, but also we have to acknowledge it's been very good, it's been favorable rainfall seasons, good years. Farmers have done their part also in terms of farming practices. But, let's give due to new varieties, new cultivars coming in and pushing up those average yields that we want. Interesting, just to also note, South Africa now on average has a higher yield than Argentina and Brazil on maize. Not there where the US is. They're about 10 tons per hectare. We are just about 6 tons per hectare on average over the last 5 years. But look at those nice growth rates, also at about 5%. So all in all, average growth rates have been phenomenal. over the last, let's say, 5 years especially, and even if you look at 10 years, because we have a drought in there. We had the 15-16 drought in there. I didn't take 2024 into consideration, so it's 2023. 2019 was also not that great, so we had a bit of a lower rainfall year in there. But I think in essence we can say we are on par if it comes to productivity growth, and even starting to catch up a little bit. The big questions, are these improvements driven by better genetics and seed technology, or are they driven by better farming practices? And my conclusion would be both. Okay, so I think it's a question of for these things to work together. So you need the better technology and you need the better farming practices. And it's difficult, and I'll show you a graph in a moment. We have tried to kind of say, is there some indication that we can split it out? I think it's too, our seasons are too varying, our conditions are too varying. I think we need both. So, and that speaks to this point. South African producers are amongst the fastest technology adopters in the world. And this is not something that BFAP says. This is, was actually stated by collaborators at University of Illinois. We are participating with them and with Grain SA and Protein Research Foundation and others, ARC, on this, on a project that we call Data Intensive Farm Management, where we do with high technology, high volumes of data, looking at if we can, what are the optimal seed density, what's the optimal fertilization volumes per hectare. And those Americans that came out, they were visiting our farmers, and they said that in their 10 years that they've worked in this program with high technology farmers, they haven't seen such a thing. And they work with the US, Argentina, Brazil, and in Europe. So our South African farmers are extremely fast technology adopters, which is a good thing. But they're also critical. They are very careful in what they select and what they don't do. And that's a good thing. It is, they carefully look, does it make sense? There's no safety net. There's no money to throw around. Does this technology make sense or doesn't it make sense? So I think that's the kind of this balance between our cultivars and our technology on the seed side, but also farming practices that play a role. So what we've done here on this graph is we've taken the cultivar trials, the highest performing cultivar, over the last 10 years or 13 years. So, and there's obviously that's this blue bar. So you can see this, there's an increasing yield, a trend in those. And if you look at those increases, in other words, those are the national cultivar trials. And if we would just plot out the top performer over the last 10 years, growth is at about 1.7%. So we do see improvements in cultivars. Let's say that would be the ideal situation where you plant it in a small plot. These plots are irrigated or kind of supplementary irrigation, but they are also exposed to heat. So if there's an extreme heat that would come, these cultivars probably in a net house could do better. So let's call these national cultivar trial results under the conditions as planted. And then the green bar gives us the national average soybean yield. And there you can see my conclusion that I'm drawing from this graph is South Africa, especially over the last 5 years. You can see that little line that runs there, that blue line. That is the gap between what I call cultivar potential and actual yield. So potential yield and actual yield. Colleagues, and that's at the end of the day what we need to focus on. So yes, the one is the pull, is we want better cultivars all of the time, and then we want to pull up these, or we can pull potential up, but then there's the push, and those are the farmers. Those are the ones that come with better farming practices and actually getting closer to what these cultivars really can deliver. So my conclusion would be, I think at least over the last 5 years, we have closed the gap between potential and actual. That's my one conclusion. My second conclusion is cultivar potential is improving. And I think 2023 has been a good year. I think there are a lot of new cultivars. If we look at the number of cultivars that are now being registered and just hearing early results out of those new cultivars, I think we're going to see a nice little step change in the next 2 years or 3 years coming. But in short, I would also say we see positive signs in the space of cultivar development. So those are the kind of these two things. It's the farmer technology, how you apply it, and then your cultivars. And together, we actually get these good yields. So the story on seed variety since the start of SACTA, just a brief summary for those of you who don't know. And I don't know all the history. There are people in this room who know the SACTA history much better than I do. So I had to stand on their shoulders and hear what they wrote. But essentially, SACTA started collecting wheat and barley leaves in 2016. And then oats was added in 2018, and then soybeans 2019. So lupins also, they were approved in 2021, still very small sector, and I don't have good data on lupins. So we'll see what happens in that space. Corné, we can maybe work on some data in that space. But in essence, let's just look at 2018 if we look at the scoreboard. And you can also look at these bars. Look at the soybeans, the number of cultivars that came in recently. Huge number of cultivars that came in. So we're looking at those new varieties, and 81 new soybean varieties, 53 wheat, 2 new barley, 5 oats, and 1 lupin cultivar. So that gives you a bit of an overview of the number of seed varieties. I think it's, if we look a little bit at a timeline, it's fair to say that we've certainly seen a step change in the release of soybean seed varieties in the past 2 seasons. And you can clearly see that. So I've drawn a line where SACTA levy was introduced, and you've already seen this bump up. Can you see when South Africa really started growing soybean hectares? In 2010, we attracted more interest by seed companies. And then just look at this little bump, or a nice jump, in 2021, 2022. So a lot of new varieties now in the last 2 years. That's why I say I think there are bigger things coming. And then on the right-hand side, just to remind ourselves, it's a GM country. Andre talked about the GM events, the synchronization of those events, how important that is. And it comes back to some of the focus areas that we have also in the master plan is the registration, the registrar's office, capacity in the office, that can go faster. It cuts to all ends. It cuts to the trader side, it cuts to the seed breeder side, and it really influences our performance. And, harbors are expensive to fix, but the registrar's capacity and Act 36 and all of those good things, those are not expensive things to fix. We just need to get it done. Okay, and on the wheat side, again, a rate of release of new wheat varieties has improved. So I've just kind of drawn lines before SACTA levy was introduced. Maybe I should have kind of done the next little step there just before the dotted line. But certainly you can see where the dotted line is, where the SACTA levy was introduced. There seems to be a rate of increase, obviously, in the number of varietal releases that we're seeing. So it is working in the sense that we want to see more. We want to see more options. They need to perform also. Obviously, that's an important part of it. And we have seen much higher yields. As I've mentioned, the last 5 years in wheat, 5% average annual increase in yield. And that's decent. Again, part of it, farming practices, good climate. Part of it is variety. So why do we need to keep investing in higher yields? And I'll just wrap up and bring some of these into perspective. This is the long-term story. The declining trend in long-term real global commodity prices requires South Africa to stay on a productivity curve. So this graph runs from 1960, and these are in real terms, these are soybean and wheat prices. I just put it on an index that you can run, that you can compare them in an index. But colleagues, this just gives you a feel for why we as farmers and the total industry, where we always have to remain, if we want to be in the world market, if we want to grow, you need to be on that productivity curve. Why? Because in real terms, prices are always coming down. So how can you stay in business? You need to be more cost competitive on ton that you've produced. Okay, and the most striking part, apart from this declining trend, and there you can see the forecast up to 2030 or 2023. That's coming from our colleagues in the US, from FAPRI. they are projecting that we've now seen prices come down 30% lower than a year ago. And Andre, you've already done that export parity comparison. So we're going to have a tough time to compete. Even at export parity, if we have a good crop, prices are extremely low. So how are we going to compete with that? We need good yields, we need good productivity rates at farm level. But there you can see, just in relative term, that bump, these great prices that we just had over 2 years, in real terms, they are slightly lower than the bump that we had in 2007 with the biofuel and the 2009 with the crisis. And there's a 2013 drought in the US. So you can all stack them up, but essentially, in real terms, that's what you have to compete with. In soybeans, so not replicating or duplicating what Andre already mentioned, I mean, it's been a great success story. Look at the left-hand side. The growth that we've seen over the last 10 years in soybeans has been phenomenal, growing from, let's say, 200, 300,000 tons to an amazing crop of 2.7 million tons. That's right there where the shaded area starts. And then on the right-hand side, what we've done there, and this is in collaboration with colleagues from PRF, we're keeping a careful eye on what's happening in the local market. And this is probably the most important, this is the key message now for seed breeding and for farmer soybean industry going forward. The soybean industry has been a major success, but the switch from import parity to export parity, effectively, it implies it's about a 30% drop in prices from import parity to export parity. So last year we managed it. We got 590,000 tons of soybeans exported, but the reality is prices are lower, much lower, and we need to compete at those prices. And if we look at, on the right-hand side, that curve, the amount of, we've essentially, and this is actually maybe the next graph shows it better, that little blue line, can you see it moving and increasing much faster than the green line? The green line is total soya oil cake usage in South Africa. So can you see what South Africa has done? We've essentially caught up. We've basically done a lot of import replacement, and now we've basically caught up with the local market. And that was the easy phase. We call that in BFAP phase 1. Phase 2 is being competitive at export parity levels, and that's what we're aiming for, that's what we need to work for. And that's why these cultivar developments, improvements are so important, because that's going to be the game. In our view, our forecast, we say growth beyond the local market will have to come from exports. And that's why also these marginal increases, Andre, like on your transportation cost, your rail, your ports, everything has to work together for this industry to achieve that goal. If we talk about wheat, South Africa remains a net importer of wheat. But we can see in the recent years that additional growth and demand has basically been covered by rising local production. So we have seen production increasing in the wheat industry, and that's due to higher yields and slightly expansion in area. So we have seen, especially in the Western Cape, which initially we actually saw some area coming down. The wheat farmers, Andries is taking out his wife's garden for some more wheat hectares. So we have seen more hectares growing there, a little bit, about 30,000 hectares more. But in essence, if you eyeball those blue and green bars, imports are around about 1.8 million, and production is keeping up now with that additional demand. Just to wrap up then, as we're getting to the end, Marnus's graph, I think there are few people that can have a 100-year graph. So we love 100-year graphs. On the right-hand side, colleagues, that is a 100-year graph of area planted of wheat in South Africa. South Africa wheat area and yield. So if you eyeball that, 1917, there were just under 500,000 hectares of wheat planted. And the wheat area peaked in about the late 70s. Now, I won't ask who in this room was responsible for that, but we did peak at about 2 million hectares of wheat in the late 70s, and it's come all the way down. So we're around about 540,000 hectares now. But look, again, those yields have increased. We are simply not competitive at export parity in wheat. We have areas where we can grow competitively, make a difference on imports, but certainly not at export parity. You can go and do those calculations. But again, that success story, look at that ramp up of soybean hectares It's been basically no crop in the 70s, and now we have a decent-sized crop of soybeans. That's it from my side. I look forward to any questions. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks, Feli. I forgot to mention earlier that actually you are a professor.
That doesn't matter. I'm a farmer.
Now I realize with all of this analysis that actually this guy is more than what I said. Thank you for that insightful presentation. And Feli is from the Peru for Food and Agriculture Policy. Yeah, it's time to ask questions. Maybe I should fire first while you compose your question. You said earlier, you actually asked a rhetorical question about whether the improved yields are as a consequence of better farming practices or better genetics. And then you said it's a bit of both. I thought you didn't want to credit SACTA.
I did, didn't I?
Because
I said both.
You said it's a bit of both. I think we are not sure.
But no, the reality is, I'll invite you to a farm. It's difficult to make that split. But I think the combo is important.
You made a compelling case, though, that since the levies started, there's been an improvement in the yields.
Correct.
So I thought, look, Dion should be sort of smiling somewhere. All right, let's have the questions on the floor. Yes, my brother, please.
Thank you, Prof. It's Aaron again, and thank you for this informative presentation as well. I thought maybe I shouldn't let you go, given the analytical guru you are, and sitting now next to SACTA, which seems to again be playing such a significant role. And like many others that are here, if you look at the trusts and the role that they're playing, but because I'm participating more on the developing agriculture part, my question is phrased around that. Well, it's not actually really a question, it's a comment that, given the role that SACTA and others are playing, especially the trusts and the level of information and data that they have, we actually struggle in the development space around getting accurate data. When you look at yield and farmer performance, you look at productivity, and you want to measure that against what you say is the potential yields that the farmers can get and the actual yields that they are getting. And because for us in the development space, we are trying to narrow that gap. And SACTA and the like present an opportunity, in my view, to actually get that accurate data. Because of the role that they play in the space, So I'm just putting it out there that, it's again maybe another source of information and data that can help the industry around, the role and the performance and productivity of new farmers. So it's just a comment.
No, Aaron, thanks very much. So you're speaking right to our heart and our space here. So Sandy will be talking about exactly that. So in BFAP, we've launched what we call a roadmap to inclusive agriculture transformation, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want to capture more information at the ground level of what's happening at transformation projects. We don't have good data. We need to get it. We need to get there, and these are green shoots. We're working with SACTA. We're working with OAC. And many other of the industries where we're starting to compile the data and understanding and starting to map progress, because it's important. We want to close the gap. That's a 1.6. So it's data. We need to have better information that we can start to measure, that we understand the impact. Secondly, we can see progress. And thirdly, I see the spillover effects. So colleagues, we're doing a lot of work also in Africa on value chains. And I see South Africa has a huge opportunity to literally leapfrog our emerging, new entrant farmers to commercial yields. Where in Africa and an organization like SACTA can play a big role in this leapfrog of technology, of information, of extension services. And you guys are also in that space right there. We can actually leapfrog yields. They don't have to be that low. They can be really at the commercialized levels that we need it. And if you just look at the markets, we need commercialized levels of yields for farmers to be profitable. That's the reality. Scale, we can debate around scale, but the reality is just whatever scale you have, you just need to get those commercialized yields going. So that's a great comment. Thanks for that.
Excellent, and thanks for your commitment to improve the data collection and analysis. And hopefully in the next session of this kind, we will have more data and analysis. All right, I've got two last questions. Yeah, you wanted to ask? Oh, all right, okay. All right. I like the idea of leapfrogging, but I would rather have leap springballing. Springbok, leap.
Leap springbocking, okay.
Thank you, Ferdi. Wessel Lemmer from Agbeschrein. I'm very interested, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about that potential yield and the national cultivar trials yield. You say there's a great potential for still improvement, but we accept it as a kind of a norm. I would like to know, we saw the numbers on a national level. Are there certain areas, say for instance for soybeans, that we see that gap narrow much more than a national average? Is the national cultivar yields, that trials, are they representative of the national crop? Maybe not. And in those specific areas where that national cultivar yields are, how does that compare to the actual yields in that area? Because there must be a reason, say on dry land in the same area, why we can't narrow that gap more. And then we would like to store that crop. Thanks.
No, it's always good to have storage in the room, Wessel. I think there's a lot more nice work that we can do. It was the interest of time. I was capped on time here, but Erod has also worked with me on that graph. So Erod, I mean, there's a lot of nice stuff that we can do on it. So that was literally an average of the cool, moderate, and warm areas, top performers. So we made it very, very rough national averages of the cultivars, but there are trials on all these different sites. And if you make it a very easy comparison, Wessel, it's cool, moderate, warm, literally east, central, west of those results. But we can all unpack it, and there are areas where we're actually closing out. I mean, last year, the Northwest was right on target of what they could potentially reach, because it was a wonderful year in the Northwest. But this year they are far below what the potential is because of the tough year. The East is, so you can probably, if you want to do it really technical, you can look which one has a CV. You can work out a coefficient of variation of which one hits the potential more frequently and where are the more risky areas. But we all know the answer. It's in the West, it's more risky. It's more around, and I think if we can, and those are, I think, also in the technology side, if we can get more drought resistance going, shorter varieties, longer varieties, to play around with it, I think that's part of a key success for adaptation of climate, of these climate extremes, if you can play around with it. So I think the new cultivars, in terms of the length of grow that they give, you'll be far more flexible to absorb climate. So you would probably plant a package, let's say 2 or 3 cultivars, one with a longer one, one medium, one slow, or short, medium, long growth to mitigate climate impacts.
Oh, thank you, Ferdi. I think you have answered comprehensively. We wanted to wrap up this session.
Tobias has one more question.
Yeah, I'll be very generous, but this is extraordinarily generous.
We will give you some extra soybeans after the meeting. Ferdi, a quick question. Having done this analysis, and it's a lovely one, thank you very much, and it's also encouraging to us to see the return on investment, but you might see that we are rapidly heading to R1 billion worth of money invested in cultivars. Having done this analysis, what are your thoughts on how do we assess the return on investment? What other factors do we need to start monitoring and making sure that we really perform on the cultivars and the genetic improvement?
Oh, that's a good question.
Brief answer to the good question.
Brief answer to good questions. Tobias, I think probably doing more work on the yield gap stuff. I think that could give us the best lead indicator of return on investment over time. And then the second one's benchmarking. looking at the countries, who's doing what, and then careful assessment of these cultivar performances. I think that's in short. So more benchmarking on cultivars and then a careful track of the yield gap. The Australians do a great job on the yield gap stuff.
All right. Beatrix, please come forward and present some gift to our speaker for the lovely talk and take a nice picture. Oh, you know the criteria. Yes. There you go. Thank you so much.